Joining us now, Congressman Patrick McHenry is the chairman of the Financial Services Committee. What do you make of yesterday's testimony? He giveth and he taketh away, I think. Maybe it'll be a different message today. Maybe it'll be the good cop today, Congressman. Or do you think what he said yesterday was needed medicine for the markets?
I think it's needed medicine. The main thing is the main thing to the Fed. They have to tackle inflation and return to price stability. Look at the cost of food for the average American family. Look at the cost of goods that every American family uses, dramatically up. Inflation and inflationary policies have a massive negative economic impact, and we have to address that, and the Fed has to be laser focused on its job number one, which is price stability.
It reminds me of trying to figure out where the coronavirus came from. A lot of people say we don't need to know. Why do we keep looking in the past? But I can't help it with inflation either. I'm going to ask you, because I think it's important, why we're here, because it matters. Is it because of the reopening after the pandemic, and now we see that everyone wants to go out, and a lot of those industries didn't have enough people, so you're trying to bring them back after a lot of people retired? That's one thing. Or is it, and I'm going to ask Leader Jeffries, we're going to have him on a little bit later in the show. Do you think spending, let's see, I guess the deficit, we added 16 trillion to the deficit in the last 6 years. So under Trump, 8 trillion, and in the 2 years, you can check my numbers, 2 years under President Biden, another 8 trillion. So 16 trillion, and the Fed enabled that, obviously, but with rates so low. Is that why we're where we are? Or do you think it just has to do with, the Putin price hike or whatever externals we had?
Well, we had higher inflation coming out of COVID as a direct result of transfer payments from the federal government. Those things that were enacted by Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House fueled the economy. That put jet fuel on an already hot economy coming out of COVID, and that's why our experience of inflation was greater than any of our peers in the globe, across the globe. That was the additional items of federal spending coming from the House, the Senate, and the White House, controlled and a unified approach by Democrats. Those partisan bills have inflamed inflation and made the Fed's job much more complicated. I think we would see high inflation coming out of COVID like the rest of the world, but nothing to the tune of what we're currently seeing. And so it is the brunt of inflation is borne by my Democrat colleagues who spent $5 trillion outside of normal legislative bounds.
Okay, let's say that you run up a deficit with tax cuts, or increase the deficit with tax cuts. And that's where we have this.
Which is not true. We actually have higher we actually have $1.9 trillion higher tax revenue than before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
It didn't pay for the cuts.
$900 billion more.
It didn't cover the cuts, though. It didn't cover the cuts, though, but revenue went up.
We actually have higher revenue today than before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act by the tune of $1.9 trillion. And even in Washington, that's a massive amount of money. So this whole thing about blaming it on the tax cuts is patently absurd.
But it did add to the deficit.
It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with spending.
It did add to the deficit. And if you believe that the 31 trillion and the interest payments on the 32 trillion is part of the reason, that we're sort of in this mess, it doesn't really matter where the deficits come from. I don't think that. It's just that I know we're going to hear from viewers, geez, you let these Republicans talk about what we did the last 2 years, and it was, a lot of spending in the previous administration.
Well,
also, go ahead.
Yes, and look, there is bipartisan blame for overspending, but what we've seen in the last 2 years is record spending. The last Congress spent more money than any Congress on record. And then they're saying, well, Republicans want to cut taxes. Well, look, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act more than paid for itself. We have higher revenue today than before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and $900 billion higher than what the CBO predicted we'd have in federal revenue this year. So we don't have a tax problem, we have a spending problem. And what we're going to hear from the president is we need to raise taxes and dramatically increase spending. That's what his budget's going to say when it's released tomorrow.
When would you have said enough in the last year? Because I think the infrastructure bill was bipartisan, right? And I think part of the American Rescue Plan, was that totally all Democrats, Congressman?
The Inflation Reduction Act and the American
Inflation
Rescue Plan
Reduction
were
was
both
all Democrat.
partisan bills.
Right.
Both
so
of them.
which two? So the last, the CHIPS Act, I don't know about that. Did you vote for that, the CHIPS Act?
No. So we have $4 trillion in two partisan bills, the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan.
Okay.
And those were on partisan lines, and that increased spending a substantial amount. And then beyond that, Joe, for discretionary spending, it's up 40% from pre-COVID. So we have to take stock of our fiscal house. We have to take stock of our spending. We have to have a holistic review of these important social safety net programs to make sure that they're solvent for the long term.
Right.
We've got important fiscal house work to be done.
President Biden is going to say, okay, we're going to raise Medicare taxes on people that make over $400,000, and I don't know, we're going to do some things with pharmaceutical prices, and the problem's fixed from here on out. But the Journal kind of takes him to task on that not one thing about the underlying problem is addressed, and this isn't going to work. We're going to have the same problem again. You just can't keep raising taxes on people that make over $400,000 to pay for everything. That doesn't work that way. What should we do?
Well, and in a competitive world, we shouldn't just turn to tax increases. We've got to make sure that we outgrow our way through this deficit challenge. That means we've got to focus on economic growth for the long term. That means smart policies of regulatory reform to enhance our growth. And we need to really focus on that to compete with China for the next generation.
So when we have Leader Jeffries on, we're looking forward to it. I can, if you have like a really good question for him, I'll cut a sound bite and play it for him. I know everybody you guys all like each other, sort of. It's weird, but you do have some differing opinions.
We like each other.
Huh?
We like each other.
We like each other. Yeah. Somehow it happened. I think Andrew's not.
Yeah. And like people, look. We can have disagreements, and I love seeing you all disagree and snipe at each other. That's fun, but you have to like each other, at least have some mutual respect in order to have real debates. Well, and we need to have real debates here in Washington.
I'm just telling you, when Leader Jeffrey comes on, the stuff he says is going to be so different from what you just told us that it's going to be almost a parallel universe. And I don't know what viewers at home are supposed to do. It's like... so what should we ask him?
Well, I look for
a really tough question. Let's really put him on the spot, and then next time I'm going to ask him what to ask you and put you on the spot. But how do I put?
Sure, that's fine.
How do we put Leader Jeffries on the spot?
With unified Democrat control of Washington for the last 2 years, do you think you own the results of the economy? You can't just pick and choose. You can't say, I like the good bits and I don't like the bad bits. Well, the bad bits right now are inflation, and that's all I hear about when I'm traveling and when I'm at home. So inflation is the #1 economic issue the American people are facing, and it's solely at the foot of unified Democrat control here in Washington, in my view.
Because we're going to hear that what I keep hearing is that, we reduce that. I mean, we're going to hear it with the president's speech. We reduce the deficit in record amounts by not spending a bunch of pandemic relief. Not hard to cut a $4 trillion deficit.
Sure.
And then we added more jobs.
We
added more jobs than anybody else ever has in history. And really, we're just now above where we were pre-pandemic. I don't know if that's creating jobs when people come back to work.
Right, and this is like an adult showing up at a little league game and saying that they can crush them, right? When we're coming off the pandemic and federal closures of the economy, and you're saying, "Wow, we created new jobs." I mean, come on, give me a break. When you say we went from record deficits when the economy is shut down, I mean, give me a break. So some of these things are just cherry-picked, the same political tripe that we always get out of politics in Washington, and people are sick of this. The fact is, we have an inflation problem and an economic challenge.
That's perfect. Those last 3 sentences, maybe we'll play. I'm gonna get a producer to work. Is that okay, or you don't want? Is that too tough for Leader Jeffries?
Look. We can have big disagreements, and we do. I don't think we should have financial regulators doing social policy. I don't think we should have them doing climate policy. I'd like to have that debate.
Yep.
But what we know about the two parties is Republicans don't want to raise taxes, Democrats do. Democrats want to raise spending, Republicans don't. And I think these things are the crux of the big economic debate. But we have a lot of other things that are very, very important for us to focus on in Congress as well.
Great having you on, Congressman, as always. And you should watch, because you're going to see yourself, I think. I'm going to try and do that. See if we have time. When is...
For better or worse, for better or worse.
See you later. Thank you.